Imagine waking up knowing that by sunset, your entire civilization might be gone, your city could be burned, your family enslaved, your culture erased. And the most terrifying part? The army coming for you is the most powerful force the world has ever seen. That was the reality facing the Greeks in. For 79 BCE, for nearly a year, the Persian Empire had crushed everything in its path. Athens had already been abandoned and burned. The Greeks had survived at Salamis. Yes, but survival is not victory, because Persia was still here, still armed, still massive, still determined. And if the Greeks failed one final time, Greece as we know it might never exist. No democracy in Athens. No golden age of philosophy. No Socrates. No Plato. No Aristotle. Maybe no Alexander. Maybe even no version of Western civilization that looks familiar to us today. And all of that would come down to one brutal battle on the plains of Plataea. This is the story of the battle that may have saved Greece. To understand why Plataea mattered so much, we need to rewind, because this wasn't just another war. This was revenge. Years earlier, Greek city-states had supported a revolt in Asia Minor against Persian rule. It was a direct insult to the Persian Empire, and Persian kings did not forget. Insults. First came Darius, then Marathon in 490 BCE, where the Greeks shocked the world by defeating a Persian invasion force. That defeat humiliated Persia. But then came Xerxes. Point one, and Xerxes was not interested in a limited response that he wanted total submission. He built one of the greatest invasion forces the ancient world had ever seen. A gigantic multinational army, engineers, archers, cavalry, elite guards, supply systems, naval support, an empire moving like a machine. When that force marched toward Greece, the message was clear: submit or disappear. Some Greek states surrendered, some cooperated, others panicked, but a few resisted. That resistance gave us Thermopylae, the legendary stand of Leonidas, a battle remembered for courage, even in defeat. But after Thermopylae, the Persians kept coming. Athens was evacuated, then burned. Imagine seeing your city in flames and knowing the enemy responsible still controlled your land. That was the Greek reality. Then came Salamis. A naval disaster for Persia, a turning point, but not the end, because while Xerxes returned east with part of his forces, he left behind a massive army under one of his most experienced commanders, Mardonius. And Mardonius had one job: finish the conquest. Mardonius was not reckless. He understood power, diplomacy, and psychology. He knew Greece wasn't one united nation. It was a patchwork of rival city-states with egos, grudges, and conflicting priorities. Instead of immediately smashing everyone, he tried politics. He approached Athens with an offer: point to join Persia, keep your territory, receive favorable treatment, stop resisting. Honestly, from a survival perspective, some people might have accepted. Athens had already suffered horribly. Its people were exhausted. But Athens refused. That decision changed history, because once diplomacy failed, war became inevitable. The Greeks needed a united army, and unity was never easy. Sparta was the dominant land power. Athens was essential politically and strategically. Smaller states had their own fears. There were arguments, delays, distrust, political tension. But eventually, something remarkable happened. They came together, not perfectly, not joyfully, but enough. And that was what mattered. A coalition force assembled, likely tens of thousands. Strong Spartans, Athenians, Corinthians, Megarians, men from across Greece, different accents, different loyalties, different politics. Point one. Enemy command on the Greek side went largely to Pausanias, the Spartan regent, not a legendary king like Leonidas, not a larger-than-life mythic figure, just a commander suddenly carrying the weight of civilization-level consequences. Pressure. Now let's talk about the battlefield. Plataea. A region in Boeotia, open terrain, plains, water sources, strategic movement corridors, ground that mattered deeply depending on how each army fought, because these armies were built differently. The Persian way of war relied heavily on mobility, missile troops, cavalry flexibility, and coordinated imperial warfare. The Greek strength was the hoplite, and if you've ever seen artistic depictions of Greek hoplites, understand this. These were not lightly equipped skirmishers. These were armored infantry built for brutal close combat. Helmet, breastplate, large shield, spear, sword, formation, discipline. The phalanx was terrifying when intact. A moving wall of bronze and wood, but it depended on cohesion, Disorder could destroy it. Mardonius understood this. He wanted conditions favorable to Persian strengths. The Greeks wanted close, decisive engagement. But what followed wasn't immediate collision. It was tension, positioning, pressure, waiting. Waiting in ancient warfare was awful. Heat, dust, limited supplies, fear, rumors, uncertainty. Every sunrise could be battle day. Every sunset could mean another sleepless night. The Persians likely held advantages in cavalry, and cavalry mattered. Fast movement, harassment, disruption, supply interference, psychological pressure. 1 point. Persian cavalry aggressively targeted Greek positions and logistics. A key Greek water source became vulnerable. Supply difficulties increased. 4. Now imagine being a Greek soldier that you've come to fight this final battle. But instead of glorious combat, you're thirsty, frustrated, and increasingly pressured. That wears people down. Ancient battles weren't just about weapons. They were about nerves, and nerves were being tested. Greek commanders eventually needed repositioning. That's where things started getting dangerous, because planned movement in darkness with thousands of men from multiple city-states, that's chaos waiting to happen. Units drifted, coordination suffered, confusion spread, and confusion in front of a superior enemy can become catastrophe very quickly. From the Persian perspective, this may have looked like retreat, weakness, collapse, opportunity, and Mardonius took the bait or seized the chance. Depending on how you interpret it, he committed aggressively. This was the moment everything tipped. Picture dawn breaking over, dust-filled plains, men shouting in different languages, metal clattering, orders half-heard, fear turning physical. The Persians moved in. This was no ceremonial clash. This was violent confusion becoming open battle. The Spartan-led Greek forces faced enormous pressure. Persian missile fire was dangerous. Momentum mattered. For a time, things were uncertain. And uncertainty in battle feels endless. Seconds feel like minutes. Minutes feel like hours. Then the nature of combat began to shift. Because eventually, if heavily armored Greek infantry could close distance, the fight changed dramatically. Persian strengths were formidable, but close-quarter collision with disciplined hoplites was another kind of nightmare. Now, imagine the sound, not cinematic music. Real sound. Men screaming, bronze striking wood, spears splintering, bodies hitting earth, panic, breathing inside helmets, and a glorious overhead camera angle. Just survival. The Spartans held. That mattered enormously, because once they held, the battle stopped being a Persian exploitation of confusion and became a brutal infantry struggle. Mardonius was not hiding in safety. Ancient commanders often had to be physically present. Visibility mattered, leadership mattered, morale mattered, and then came one of the most decisive moments of the battle. Mardonius was killed. Exactly how details are described varies in ancient sources, but the impact is unmistakable. Leadership loss in ancient warfare could be devastating. Imagine fighting in a chaotic dust cloud, and suddenly hearing your commander is dead, not wounded, dead. That changes everything. Confidence fractures, orders break down, momentum shifts, fear spreads faster than discipline. And for the Persians, that was catastrophic, because armies are not just formations, they are emotional systems. Once enough people believe defeat has started, defeat often accelerates. The Greek coalition pushed harder. 6, and now the psychological current reversed. Earlier, Greeks had been pressured. Now Persians were destabilizing. That shift decides battles. Let's pause for a second and appreciate how close history can come to going another way. If Greek confusion had turned into collapse, different story. If Persian pressure had shattered cohesion, different story. If leadership moments had gone differently, different story. History often feels inevitable when told afterward. It wasn't. To the people standing there, nothing was guaranteed. Not survival, not victory, not legacy. Just immediate brutal uncertainty. As Persian organization broke down, retreat became increasingly desperate. Some forces tried to regroup, others fled. Defensive positions became critical, but the coalition momentum was now overwhelming. Meanwhile, elsewhere on the field, other Greek contingents fought their own intense engagements. Coalition warfare is messy. Battles are not clean one-on-one duels. They fragment, perform, explode, yet the overall direction was becoming clear. Persia was losing badly. And remember, this was not some minor frontier force. This was imperial military power, the same empire that terrified regions across continents, now reeling in Greece. That mattered psychologically beyond the Battlefield Point 7 because empires depend, partly on perceived inevitability. Once inevitability cracks, everything changes. For the Greeks, victory at Plataea wasn't just military survival. It was emotional vindication. Think about what had happened. Thermopylae sacrifice, Athens burned, constant fear, political infighting, the looming possibility of annihilation. Then this. A battlefield where resistance held. That kind of victory becomes identity. And that's exactly what happened. Plataea entered the Greek memory as proof that resistance against overwhelming power could succeed, not easily, not cleanly, but successfully. Now, an important reality. Check. History is rarely as simple as one battle saved everything. That's dramatic shorthand. Salamis mattered. Thermopylae mattered symbolically. Broader strategic decisions mattered. Political cooperation mattered. Persian logistical realities mattered. But Plataea was undeniably massive because this was the decisive destruction of Persian land ambitions and mainland Greece. After this, the invasion dream changed fundamentally. The existential threat that had hung over Greece was dramatically reduced. That's why historians treat this battle so seriously. And here's the fascinating human part. Point 8. The Greeks who fought there probably weren't thinking, we are preserving future philosophy. Nobody says that while trying not to die. They were thinking about immediate things, staying alive, holding formation, protecting comrades, following orders, not breaking. History assigns meaning afterward, but that doesn't make the meaning less real because consequences ripple. Athens would later flourish. Intellectually, Greek political ideas would spread. Hellenic culture would influence later civilizations profoundly. None of that unfolds the same way if Persia fully dominates mainland Greece. Maybe some version still emerges. Maybe not. Counterfactual history is tricky, but it's fair to say Plataea mattered enormously. Let's talk about trust. When people hear stories like this, there's a temptation to reduce everything to mythology. Heroic Greeks versus faceless Persians. Civilization versus barbarism. Simple good versus evil. Real history is more complex. The Persian Empire was sophisticated, organized, administratively impressive, and culturally significant. This was not cartoon villainy. That complexity actually makes Plataea more interesting because it wasn't a fantasy story. It was two serious military systems colliding at a turning point. That's what makes ancient history compelling. Real humans, real uncertainty, real consequences. Point 9. Think about one anonymous soldier, not Pausanias, not Mardonius, just one ordinary fighter, maybe a farmer weeks earlier, maybe someone who had never traveled far from home, now standing in armor under a hot sky, facing an imperial army. No certainty of survival, no promise history would remember him, and yet his presence mattered. That's one of the most powerful things about ancient battles. History remembers leaders. Civilizations are often carried by ordinary people. Plataea also teaches another lesson. Unity does not require friendship. The Greek city-states argued constantly, distrusted each other, competed fiercely, and yet under existential threat. Cooperation became possible. Messy cooperation, imperfect cooperation, but enough. That's often how history works. Not through ideal harmony, through practical alignment under pressure. Now imagine the aftermath. Silence after chaos, dust settling, broken equipment, wounded men, exhaustion replacing adrenaline, and then realization that we survived. Not everyone, but enough. The empire that came to finish Greece had been stopped. That emotional transition must have been extraordinary. Fear giving way to disbelief. Disbelief turning into pride. Pride becoming memory. Point 10. Of course, history kept moving. Greek rivalries returned. New wars emerged. Future disasters came. Human beings remain human beings. Victory does not magically create permanent wisdom, but for that moment, for that critical historical window, Plataea changed the trajectory, and that's why people still talk about it more than 2,000 years later, because some battles are tactical, some are symbolic, some feel civilizational. Plataea belongs in that conversation. So, did the Battle of Plataea save Greece? If by save, we mean single-handedly carrying all historical weight, that's too simplistic. If by save, we mean serving as a decisive turning point that helped end the Persian threat to mainland Greece? Yes, absolutely, and maybe that's enough, because history doesn't need exaggeration to be extraordinary. A coalition of divided city-states stood against one of history's greatest empires and held. That's already incredible, and somewhere in the noise, Terror, dust, and blood of Plataea. The future changed, maybe not in one dramatic cinematic instant, but in countless human decisions. A commander holding position, a soldier refusing to run, an alliance holding together just long enough, a battle tipping, one brutal moment at a time. That's how history usually changes, not through inevitability, through fragile moments. That could easily have gone the other way. Point 11. And that's what makes Plataea unforgettable and